Hello everyone, wherever you are. Welcome back to Deloitte Canada's transfer pricing series on financial transactions. Let's move to the third branch and zoom in on the details of how to effectively align your policies, procedures, and people to support your transfer pricing positions. It is my pleasure to introduce Kevin Gale, a transfer pricing specialist and financial transaction expert with Deloitte in Winnipeg, who's hosting this particular segment.
In the previous segments, we considered the role of Treasury and the global audit environment. Now it's time for us to zoom in on the details of how these may change how your organizations approach financing. In this segment, we will cover Meet the Parent, the existence of the multinational corporation parent in financial arrangements. We'll cover showing your work, proving out the positions you take and how you do that. We'll also look at who is in your lineup, who in the organization needs to be involved. Lastly, we'll look at substance and control in a transaction. That's real people doing real things in real places. The purest view of the arm's length principle in transfer pricing is based on the premise that companies and transactions are priced assuming there is no existing relationship between the entities, that they are two independent enterprises acting as standalone parties. However, the purest view is under attack because of a concept called passive association. Passive association really means that subsidiaries in an MNC group benefit merely from their association with the overall corporation. For financial transactions, this means that subsidiaries within a group have their credit risk impacted solely by their association with the group without the group committing to formal support of the subsidiary. This construct on the surface does not reconcile with the traditional view of the arm's length principle, under which the existence of a parent would not be contemplated. Passive association or implicit support is something that is seen in the arm's length world. There is evidence that ratings agencies and banks in their lending practices factor this into their daily activities. Tax authorities love this concept because it provides a weapon in the battle against base erosion from financial instruments. And many tax authorities are increasingly relying on this concept. In most cases, the MNC group will have a higher credit rating than any of its subsidiaries on a standalone basis. So the tax authorities can use this to lower the interest rate on a loan, for example. This concept will typically lead to downward pressure on planning using financing. Consider this example. The chart shows a visual representation of what I'm talking about. Under a standalone approach, the arm's length rate could be determined to be, say, 7% based on a B+ credit rating, the green bar. However, the MNC parent is A rated, and at that rating, the arm's length rate would be 2%. Applying implicit support may get you somewhere in the middle, say BBB, and a rate of 4%, or even up to A or A-. As we can see by comparing the three colored bars, the increase in credit rating can have a substantial impact on the arm's length rate. Now we're going to talk about showing your work. In a global tax environment and with an increased focus on base erosion and profit shifting, or BEPS, having strong documentation for financial transactions is becoming more and more important. Companies entering into financial structures often ignore the importance of the value of the actual transaction that gets reported on a tax return. The financial expense, generally interest. That expense represents the benefit that will be eliminated if the structure fails. In most cases, the rules around how a transaction is structured are based on a defined set of parameters and established rules. However, how to deal with the economics of the transaction are less well defined than general tax rules, which means that the taxpayer and tax authorities have flexibility in how price is determined and is an easier means to raise an adjustment. The ultimate goal of having appropriate documentation is to mitigate the tax risk associated with the intercompany financing transaction. Now, documentation can have several components, and the number of required components depends on the size and complexity of the financial transactions and the jurisdictional requirements. The components necessary to be considered can vary from a simple benchmark support for an interest rate on a loan to something that demonstrates that the entire financing transaction is arm's length and would include an analysis in the context of current capital markets specific to the industry in which the subject company operates. And in the case of a debt instrument, this includes the borrower's ability to service the debt. Next, we're going to talk about who is in your lineup. Traditionally, financial transactions have had involvement from tax personnel and sometimes Treasury and finance. Coordination of these areas are important, as we've already discussed in detail in previous segments. The challenge with this becomes a matter of timing, priorities, and understanding of the rules in each jurisdiction. The reality is that in an audit context, particularly litigation, the treasurer of a corporation is likely to be viewed as a qualified expert when it comes to pricing financial transactions. Given this potential reality, It is important to have these individuals on board with what is happening, but most importantly, that those individuals understand the world of transfer pricing, which is different than their day-to-day world in many cases. The last piece of this segment, we'll talk about substance and control. The days of offshore shell companies to avoid tax is long gone. The focus of taxing authorities is on ensuring that taxation in a jurisdiction is consistent with real people doing real things in a physical location. This extends to financial transactions and the expertise of the people executing the transaction. Having personnel at the lender and the borrower that are qualified to make the borrowing and lending decisions and execute and monitor the day-to-day activities with attention to detail are becoming increasingly important. That concludes this segment. We talked about some important changes occurring with respect to technical aspects of pricing intercompany financial transactions, namely implicit support, as well as the importance of teaming between tax and treasury, the necessity of having good documentation, and having the right personnel in place surrounding the transaction. Thank you for watching, and we hope you enjoyed this segment.